thank you to all of our panelists. The same rules are going to apply as from our earlier morning session about we really want the audience to be participatory in this. So please, I hope you have some questions burning for our panel. I wanted to actually start it off with two questions. One for this from the student perspective, and then one not from the student perspective, but because we do have a lot of students in the room. The first question from sort of the student's perspective, if you could just very quickly talk about what was your spark or your moment, your sort of origin story that got you interested in doing the kind of work that you are doing. So that's the first question. And then the second question that I really wanted to ask is about except for Elizabeth's presentation, most of us were speaking about working with our nonprofits and kind of like the sort of smaller communities. You know, we're in a room where we would consider the bubble, and we're speaking to the bubble, we're sharing our work in these same kind of spaces. And so can you speak to what sort of strategies you might have to make sure that larger populations are seeing this work? And then maybe, Elizabeth, if you could speak about the reaction like shows like Grey's Anatomy has had, or even Superstore, based on when these kinds of issues have sort of started to come up. So those are the two burning questions that I had, and then we'll open it up to the audience.
I'll start off being a young person still myself. No. Just to the question of what that spark was, I actually, as a young person, was always interested in media and the power of media moving culture and life. And so I was entering the point of media moguldom in my vision of my future self in music, because I always found that music and sound was sort of like the most powerful platform. And then I discovered film in that dynamic. So my background is a little bit circuitous. I started out my formal career in finance, actually worked at Goldman Sachs, worked with hedge funds, and really dived deep into finance and shifted to philanthropy, and came into this community of social impact storytelling as an intermediary funder and someone who was kind of using these skills from another sector to translate and simplify what youth media and youth storytelling was. And this was back in 2003. And that's actually where I sort of found my purpose in thinking about filling in the space and that leverage, coming into an organization and a field that was on the precipice of what we know today as sort of the democratization of storytelling. Anybody, my daughter makes about 10 stories a day in some form or another. So that was my sort of aha moment, is sort of how can I use my fill-in-the-blank skills for change making. And then the question around how do we advance stories like Julie's and all the young storytellers at GFS, we really do it through these powerful partnerships. You know, there is power in partnering with NYU. There's power in partnering with individuals who work inside of the industry. And we partner with many of the major studios. We partner with many of the major television studios and companies. And we're not just working on the education piece, which is educating, developing, and celebrating our storytellers, which we do, I believe, at the highest level. I think that was why we are here today. It's sort of like when you get an invitation to a dance, don't go alone. You bring the artist, you bring the whole team. So that's just a principle of elevating the process and the community. But even further, it really does matter who's in the room and who makes the introduction. So we have an extraordinary board of directors and leaders. We have an extraordinary board of stakeholders and partners who are really working at the highest level of industry, from Hollywood and at a global level, to work with the Bloombergs of the world, to work with the Sky Medias of the world, and all the way down the list. I mean, we are really fortunate to approach partnership from a reciprocal way. I think people automatically, when you meet Julie and you see the work, it's not only the artist herself, but it's the art that she's making. They see that there's value there clearly, but we also engage our partners and let them know clearly that we offer great value, and it has to be a two-way street. It's not about writing a check or showing up for a screening. It's actually about the very long game, 20 years from now. So hope that answers both questions.
Yeah, I was thinking about to the presentation earlier this morning about kind of the range of emotions, right, and how that can influence behavior, and mine was righteous anger. And my daughter was really in a crisis moment and needed to get her help immediately and was in an intake situation. And the woman was doing the intake forms like, so you're unemployed and you don't have health insurance, right? And I was like, nope, I got a pretty good job, and she said it 3 times. Yeah, so you don't have a health. I mean, it was like, hello, like here's my card. It didn't matter, and realized that she was just going to see what she wanted to see, even though it didn't matter how many things I was showing her. And it was this moment of just righteous indignation. I can remember that was like, what am I going to do about this? And so it was really, my advice to students is, we have those decisions, right? What we do with that emotion, and it was really like, link arms with those around you, and that's what I did, and just really started looking at work around me. And at the time I was surrounded by a ton of people doing message research that were really looking at connecting that to movement building and policy change, and that is what really sparked it. But I think for where we're moving today with the work of Illuminative, which is just born out of Reclaiming Native Truth, this research project is Standing Rock. And we spent a lot of time dissecting Standing Rock in this powerful moment that blew a hole through invisibility for a time. But to really understand that it was the power of grassroots mobilization and organizing. But that message started out with the youth. It was rooted in cultural and spiritual values of the Lakota people, but it was a message carried forward by the youth. It connected with grassroots. It was a message that resonated. Everybody in the country was saying water is life. So it called people in. But to also look at the power of participatory media. Facebook Live came online right at the same time Standing Rock did, and so it cut through the invisibility and these barriers that I sort of alluded to in my presentation in the media, and it also intersected with popular culture, and we saw the power. There was like this pivotal moments when you started seeing all of that erupting, and then it started showing up on SNL. Right, and you had Shailene Woodley and Mark Ruffalo, and it wasn't it. It's not the celebrity and it's not the pop culture pieces, but it's the intersection of all of that and tribes and different people coming together. And so that, I just think anything's possible, and that's my advice but it can start with something. It's just such a simple emotion of something that's in your life, but you can't do it alone. And we certainly don't do this work alone.
I can sort of answer the second question because I think it's something that we think a lot about at our work at Pillars, which is this idea around sort of this mainstream audience and sort of how do we sort of think about that work. And I would say that, Pillars is sort of really kind of like, I think that the community that, the American Muslim community is a really complex one. And I think for a long time, and we saw this sort of like really get exaggerated after 9/11, was this idea that like the narratives that we were putting out there were kind of like, we're just like you. And I really feel like that sort of specific narrative is problematic in a lot of different ways. And for us, like, we've talked a lot internally. We sort of, my colleagues and I sort of have this idea of Pillars has to be sort of our community has to shift from sort of a let us in mentality to like come check us out. And so for us, it's a matter of like sort of empowering sort of being unapologetically Muslim, supporting Muslim talent, supporting Muslim filmmakers, creators, nonprofit leaders, and recognizing that they're doing really cool stuff. And at some point soon, people will start to notice, and it's already starting to happen. We're seeing that happen. And I think for us, we've been less sort of interested in sort of thinking about what we think will kind of have a mainstream appeal and sort of just building this pipeline of people who are doing really cool things. And not every single thing is going to appeal. But I also we also think it's important that while yes, I think like the work that, like the clip that was shown from Superstore is so incredibly powerful, and what it's doing is so powerful. And we need so many more moments like that for many different communities. I'm also sort of just interested in sort of giving and creating things and supporting people, like having an audience be our community too, and not sort of ignore them as well, because I think for a long time, we've been sort of ignored and beaten up and sort of seen in a specific way. And so, when I see someone like Rami Youssef coming out with a show on Hulu, when I see someone like Mahershala, who are sort of very strong in their Muslim identity, I think that's where this is headed. And for us, we want to continue to sort of support our people. Rashad Robinson said something that has really moved me, and he talks about this idea of like, they can't be strong allies unless they are really strong within their own community, and they are, and I really find that to be true. Is that Pillars is really trying to sort of build some sort of communities around this idea of like what social change can look like. So
I want to just throw in, from a filmmaking perspective and someone who goes in the field, I think we talk a lot about who tells whose stories. And, I, working in Steubenville, so I'm a white lady, right? And we're looking at this, monstrous shift. It's been there, now it's just foregrounded, but I didn't know the extent in which being a white woman would serve my project in a way, because I was able to talk to people who thought because I looked like them, we shared similar ideas, and I was able to listen. I'm not going to say listen without prejudice, right? Listen with a lot of pain, but really listen and use my privilege of being a white person to allow for people to speak with me and assume I have exactly the same opinions. And I think it felt like my duty, certainly to step in spaces that I wouldn't necessarily want to be in, but because I can, it felt really like something I needed to do from a broader. I didn't go in knowing that would be the case. It was like, oh wow, wait, I'm able to do this. People are talking to me in a certain way. They're revealing certain truths to me. This is a duty then that I have now, right? So I need to hold it, I need to share it. And that was a bigger picture that I don't think I would have gotten to had I not started out in my work from a very personal place of needing to investigate an experience that was happening to me and women and friends in my life. So that was, as a beginning artist, right, is just like, well, what is your world, right? Explore and know your world, and then years in you can kind of expand out. But I think young artists sometimes feel like they have to do something enormous and that their story or their experience doesn't matter, but that's absolutely the best place to start, is your world.
For me, I came to the work from the entertainment industry. So I was a showrunner and storyteller for many years, and what I realized is that stories have a lot of power, and with that power comes a lot of responsibility that most people, particularly in Hollywood and in mass media, just don't take into account. And so I decided to sort of leave that side and go into some sort of advocacy work, not really knowing what options were there or what existed, or that an organization like Define American actually even existed. So what I think about mass media, and to Kashif's point too, is that it does exist, for better or for worse. Most of us have a lot of opinions around it, and myself included. And in mass media, storytellers are going to tell stories about immigrants and immigration. It's something that populates the news media, and that's where a lot of the transition and crossover is into, particularly something like scripted television. And I feel like for so long, and even now, so many folks get those stories wrong and tell stories that can be really, really damaging and harmful, that any like small amount that we can work with them and alongside them to sort of shift their worldview and what they know of the world, storytellers who already are empowered to be telling these stories, is important and is worthwhile. So until mass media no longer exists, or all the media outlets have become so prolific and there's so many of them that there's not that sort of power center, I think that the work that we do alongside mass media will continue to be needed.
I'd like to open it up to the audience for any questions.
Tell us your name. My name is Deirdre, but you can call me Didi. When inspired you?
Great. The question was, what inspired you?
You're powerful. She like made direct eye contact. I'm like, whoa. Who or what? Who? What inspires me? My daughter. Yep, my daughter every day. And I think, gosh, our kids, that's what gets me out of bed every day. And I bet for many of us too, especially when the going gets tough in this work, right? I think our little ones inspire.
Anybody else want to answer?
I'd say it's like my people, my family, the people that are closest to me. The entire reason that I wanted to sort of start this organization and work, I think anyone can attest to who works in sort of specific communities. It's like family. You get really frustrated. I could sit here and talk all day long about sort of the things that I felt that community leaders have done that I don't agree with, but at the end of the day, there's a deep love for these people who have sort of put, in many cases, their lives on the line, and it inspires me to be able to have sort of a privilege to be able to spotlight some of their work and be able to support it. So for me, it's all of these communities, whether it be Muslim, immigrant, Native, like all women. Like it's these communities that have just persevered, who are doing such incredible work. And so for me as a male to be able to have this privilege, it's a responsibility I take very, very seriously, and I'm inspired every day by the people that I work with.
I'd say art inspires me, and the spirit that works through artists. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Samina Essen. I'm a journalist working with the Voice of America Language Service. And being a journalist working for so long, like almost 10 years with Voice of America, all the time whenever I went to cover something about Muslims or any other minority group living in US, so I am supposed to cover that event with a certain angle. If I'm not covering the event from that certain angle, so I know that my story won't be published out there. So how, as minorities, we are all minorities, so how we can change that attitude of the government agencies or the big media giants to not to cover not to see a minority from a single lens. Like whenever I am supposed to cover the ISNA event, that is the big Muslim community event, so I have to talk about the extremism. I don't have to talk about anything else going on there. So how we can all change that?
I'd love to just say something to that because it's so true. And give an example. How many of you have heard the whole controversy around Elizabeth Warren and her claims to be Native American? And the majority of tribal leaders have forgiven her. She's apologized. She didn't claim citizenship, right? She's been very honest, but moved on, right? But it's still the story that the media wants to feast on, and it's really, really sensational. And it's really gotten to the point, we had our first ever 2 Native American women elected to Congress. Yay!
Yes.
Deb Haaland and Sharice David, and they were all sworn in with the congressional class, and the major outlets only wanted to cover the controversy around Elizabeth Warren, and there were a number of Native journalists that sometimes will get picked up by mainstream, and they basically said, we don't want to write about that. We actually want to write about Deb and Sharice. This is historic. And they were turned down. And so what the choice one of these journalists made was like, you know what, I'm going to write the story I want to write. And she put it out there. And it did get sort of picked up, but unfortunately I see a lot of young Native journalists making the decision that they're just writing around this story. And so I think it's as a journalist, I want to commend you if you're in your integrity and your storytelling, and I think that we have to really look at how we're supporting our journalists in covering that and not following into the sensationalism, because that's literally the only time that Native people are getting picked up. It seems to be wrapped up in Elizabeth Warren right now, and But I think it is doing that advocacy, and I know Betsy Richards is in the audience, and like she put out a great interview in the New York Times, but that is like the minority of the coverage that gets picked up. So I think we, for the MacArthur Foundations of the world and other, we really have to invest in sort of that advocacy in those newsrooms and those decision makers, but I think it's really looking at the alternative forms of media because it's a really vicious system of sensationalism.
Yeah, I feel you. I mean, this is, specifically to the Muslim example, yeah, obviously that's the case. So many of my friends who are journalists, for so long, that's the only interest in the community is sort of talking about terrorism, extremism. And I would echo what Crystal said. I think, it sort of demonstrates two things. I think one, and this is partly why sort of we're taking the approach that we're taking, which is, we have to sort of build this pipeline. We have to sort of have these people in decision-making positions. I think that's really, really important. And the second thing too is that, and I actually understand, I don't have a good answer because I know how difficult it is. Like I know sort of as a journalist sort of to get a story out there and sort of also sort of following your heart versus sort of wanting to build a career. It's an incredibly challenging decision to make sometimes. And I know that, I've had friends who've done either, who've sort of refused to do it and friends who've gone along with it. And I don't, I don't have an easy answer, but I do think we need more people, sort of sharing these stories, pushing back, to the extent that, and it's happening. We're already seeing it happen. I have friends for NPR who've sort of pushed back on a lot of different stories, and we've seen, important narratives. And I keep referring back to Rami's show on Hulu, which is not like, and the reason I keep referring back to it is because I think it's so unapologetically Muslim, and it doesn't actually talk about Trump. The show is not, political in that. It's this idea of what it's like to be sort of just a young Muslim in this country. And so, I would say to keep pushing back to the extent that you're able to, and really kind of building this pipeline of more journalists who can continue to write stories and share our stories out there.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Nona Ogunsula, and I have a question for Sharice Bailey and also one for Elizabeth Vorey. Sharice, I'd like to know about some of your success stories. How many of your young people have gone through the program and are now working as filmmakers or in media and film? And then Elizabeth, you talked about how you walk into a writer's room or a room full of network professionals, and you lead with comedy, and I know that can be somewhat risky, so I'd love to hear how you guys mitigate risk and, kind of telling the right jokes, since comedy can be community specific.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Nona. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to also tell a bit of our success stories through numbers. So annually, GFS serves 4,000 young creatives. So the signature program, our Film Fellows program, works in cohorts of 30. We currently serve 200 young people in New York, LA, and London through that cohort model. We also have 400 alumni out there working in creative industries, sometimes being the hiring director. We actually have Melissa Murray, who's from the first class of GFS. This is a 20-year-old organization, so you imagine most of our alums are just early 30s and have been in the writing rooms, have maybe taken a writer-director path, gone to the NYUs, gone to the USCs, or gone straight to industry. And she's our first alumni who's got a studio deal and is working on her feature shooting this year. So we consider that a remarkable success. And in addition, I think this really amazing community, and community is the word that we've created, is the roster. It is our early career pipeline program. We have over 3,200 members in New York and Los Angeles. We're providing job placement, talent development, and creating creative and content partnerships and competitions, pitch competitions, to really create the conditions and the environment for artists to make art. And also, equally important, connect with one another and see each other as peer resources, because your next job most likely is going to come from a peer and working with others. And as we know, this gig economy is so very real, and pervasive in how creative people make a living. This roster has become a really fantastic solution. So just in terms of a couple other amazing success stories, I noted that we have over 70 partnerships that help drive our work. NYU is a key partner in our college residency program. But we just signed an amazing partnership deal with National Geographic, where our students each year, our third-year students, go abroad and write a film that is produced on location in an international city. This year, that city is Rome. And so each year, I think that's a really amazing sign of success. 20 years ago, when we started with this model, which is we're not just supporting, developing, celebrating artists in our local communities, we also want to make that global connection. That distribution piece wasn't quite there. And so I think it is a remarkable success in my eyes, having been in this field for the last 15 plus years, to now have closed that loop on having such a powerful partner in National Geographic who sees the value of our content makers, but also the vast audience that we know will see those 2 short films once they're complete on the National Geographic platform. So I think those are a few examples, and I want to end with a laugh.
Thank you for your question. I should have specified I'm not the one being funny, ever. I try, but no, the comedy, the approach to like kind of lead with comedy when we go into rooms really comes from our founder, Jose. Jose is the biggest believer that immigration can be funny. And what we see so often is that we go into a room and they're already thinking about the tragedy and the tragic narratives around immigration. And those stories are really important to share and be told as well. But when you work with writers or content creators that are so stuck in the tragedy that they can't see a story outside of it, we like to introduce some comedy to get people thinking about other ways to tell the narrative. And I can give you an example of this sort of. We were working with an NBC show called Blind Spot. It's a crime procedural. They do a lot of storylines kind of around, it's like an FBI, CIA kind of thing. I think FBI. Anyway, we were working with them, and we knew going in that they wanted to do a story about an undocumented character, and that the undocumented character would probably be a victim or a villain, just because they're a crime procedural. So most of the time, crime procedurals will do like a single episode, and you'll see an undocumented person who's either, a criminal or is the victim of a crime. And we wanted to avoid that. So we strategized in advance to pitch them a different idea, and we walked into the room and we said, hey, listen, we know you're probably gonna do a single episode storyline, and it's probably gonna be a victim or a villain, but what if the undocumented person was just the girlfriend? And they were like, what? That's crazy. And we were like, I know. Wouldn't that be so interesting? Like, couldn't she just be the girlfriend? And like, she could be on the whole season. And we could get to know her. And we never know she's undocumented. And we fall in love with her. And she's super cool. And she's just a, girlfriend. And then we find out that she's undocumented. And they were like, wow, that's really different. That's cool. And so they went with that. And they did a season-long story arc with an undocumented character who was one of the primary cast members' girlfriends. So we like to push people beyond the idea that the immigrant character always has to be a really tragic subject into something that's a little bit fresher and a little bit more unexpected.
Hi, thanks everyone. I'm Jen Humke, I'm with MacArthur. And so I'm gonna fumble a little bit with my question because I have not completely formulated it perfectly in my head. But it was inspired by this question from the journalist, and it has to do with platforms. So I hear from all of you that you are at times thinking about these big platforms that really reflect mainstream media and that reach mainstream America. So the networks and NPR and the, and I often think of those kinds of platforms as, reflecting back out to society sort of the norms and values that are, that you see in mainstream America. And so if you have a story or a lived experience that you want to share that's outside of that, it becomes very difficult to share on those platforms. And I also hear from you that you're saying it is also very important that we give voice to our people in our communities, which I 100% agree with, and that oftentimes the platforms that you're talking about to do that might be an individual's podcast, or could be, I mean, it'd be great if it was Netflix or a streaming site. But so I guess my question to you is really, how do you think differently about these platforms? Because I know that you work across platforms. When do you decide, okay, it's right to go for mainstream, or no, hey, this story is something that's actually more important for our communities to see and hear from each other?
I can kind of pop in with that. That's an awesome question. In an optimistic answer, it's like an empowering choice, and you get to have all this control over where your stuff ends up. And then on the realistic side, it's like whoever acquires it and buys it and wants it and takes it. And I think there's a lot of pressure on us to constantly iterate and chunk out and create like derivative works, which is, you know, again, exciting and empowering, also super time consuming and expensive, but ultimately really useful. We were really excited to be picked up by PBS because there's no barrier to entry, and they're an incredible partner because they're allowing us to work with grassroots screening initiatives. So we're already booking around 180 screenings for April, Sexual Assault Awareness Month, in advance of PBS with no problem. And had we been brought on by Fox Sports, who were very interested in the film, which is an amazing opportunity as well, we wouldn't be able to do that. But we are just locking up a derivative short film of all the stuff I couldn't put in the feature. That's really fascinating. It's going to be on the Guardian platform. We're lucky they're working with us with Tribeca and Gucci. And for us, what we want to do at that piece, it's more conservative. It's more older folks in the town who were sort of stunned by this crime, and it's not in the courtroom. It's not that procedural vibe. It's more any town in America. And that's a 14-minute piece that we can take pieces of and give to NPR affiliates and give to podcasts. We're doing sports podcasts. We're doing crime podcasts. We're just, if you like that kind of thought process of like, how can I break up my project into 700 pieces and where should it go and not go crazy, it's exciting because it's a great moment. If that overwhelms you, then you should find someone to do it with you, because really, in a way, the opportunities are limitless. So first, you need someone who wants your stuff and will work with you like an NBC show versus whatever. And then I think it's really open to where it's sticky and what are the pieces that can be pulled out and put in other places. So for us, it's been a lot of content, a lot of innovative thinking, and collaboration with people who want to help you break it up and shift it. So
I think it's a fabulous, just to build on your ideas, Nancy, and it's a fabulous conversation and question to think about. And I think it's definitely the case of a both and in terms of strategy and approach. For GFS, it's been 20 years in the making. So we've seen everything from being at the door, sort of looking in and seeing, okay, here's a mainstream media platform. And in these last 20 years, that's completely been flattened, so that we have, you know, major companies coming to our alumni and our students, asking them to create content for Sprite and Coca-Cola and major brands, because they are the authentic thing is what we're all looking for, right? And the storytellers, they are the natives. They're native storytellers, right? We're born into this moment. Young people have been born into this moment. So there is this sort of experience that we're seeing over time that has allowed us to see ourselves as our own platform. So whether it's the screenings that we are curating at our own offices in the South Bronx or MacArthur Park, or the podcasts that our fellows are, you know, starting every week when they want to take over our music, you know, studio. It's all of those sort of the next level of the uprising of the platform that we are making space for. We're centering all of our resources and efforts for the possibility of the next wave of platform. At the same time, we work very hard and take great pride in those partnerships with more established studios and organizations, and realize that they're in play with each other, and that we actually add value because we can talk to both and bring both together. So that's been really sort of, and I think it's a little bit different in journalism, and I can sort of, I heard that question, and what I hear in that is, well, how do I continue to tell my story when you don't want to accept the truth? now that's another part of the challenge of being a storyteller in this new environment, because what is the truth is now in question as well. So I think to that, it is also about not only doing it yourself and telling the story that you want to tell yourself, but doing it with others. And I look at platforms like ITVS, Independent Lens, POV, who are looking at the intersection of journalism and storytellers and technologists and putting everyone, and activists and partner organizations. And really this conference, this convening is always, the spirit has been about putting all of these different experts in the room and centering story and storytelling. And so the platform is here. In some ways, I see this as a platform, and I think GFS, we really, 20 years later, people were saying, okay, good luck with, everything, right? And now we've arrived, and not many people are still able to say, we've been doing the work for 20 years. Here are our artists, here's our lab, here's our studio, here's what we do. We're just doing the work. So the short answer is I think we all ourselves individually are platforms and have the power through our communities to elevate those stories once we find the right collaborators and partner meaningfully.
I think we have time for one more. I will have right over here.
Thank you. My name is Bea Spadaccini, and I haven't heard the mention of Netflix yet. And I wonder if there's any potential in that partnership. I have noticed lately that, to my dismay, they have invested in films about Africa with, I think, producers in Africa. One is Black Earth Rising, which is about the Rwandan genocide and what happens at the criminal court. And it's very interesting because I've never seen something that current on Rwanda. And I was surprised to see it on Netflix. And the other one is Lion's Roar, which is a movie about a bus company in Nigeria. And I don't know, Lion's Roar. Lion's Heart, thank you. Roar, obviously, I'm thinking. But it is really cool, and I wonder is there potential or is Netflix too much of a giant, really, to be partnering with?
I would, so I think for Netflix, just from the Native American perspective, I mean, what was really lovely was there was a rush of, after Standing Rock, everyone wanted to do something on Native Americans, like, oh crap, they exist, this is cool, let's do something. But it was all non-natives that were going and pitching stuff. And so what was lovely was hearing from inside Netflix that they actually made a decision that they weren't gonna go with non-natives telling native stories, thank God, but they haven't told any native stories yet. A lot of native people are getting in the door right now pitching Netflix, so I'm just hopeful, but I do wanna use this moment to pivot and say, Amazon just made a big announcement yesterday that they just gave a deal to a woman named Heather Ray, who's of Cherokee descent, to really bring indigenous content from a lot of communities who don't normally have voice, but really with a priority on indigenous peoples. And so that was huge. It was a big announcement yesterday, so we're super excited. We're going to see more stories soon.
Yeah, Netflix, I mean, I don't think they're too giant in the sense that, like, I know a lot of people just on this panel have sort of had conversations with them and have some influence. I mean, we've seen what they've done with Hassan Minaj's show. They've really, I mean, it's insane how behind that show they are. I mean, they've really kind of marketed, like, I mean, he's got his face all over Times Square. It's crazy. And he's just like a kid from the community. It's really, really incredible to see. So I think, but I think it actually speaks to 2 points. One is to Jen's question, which I think was a really, really good one, which was around this idea of, I think what we need to be thinking about is, and this is where I think Define American is doing such incredible work, is kind of like influencing, a lot of these sort of giants, whether it's Amazon, whether it's Netflix, because there is, like, I mean, anyone who spends time out there is like, there's just pitching. Everyone is pitching something. There's always, Netflix has so much money. Amazon has so much money. I mean, Apple is a really good example that, I was just reading. They have something like 80 shows in production. They don't even have a service yet, and that's gonna, but they, like, I was at a convening that CAA hosted last year, and I was talking to like Alan Yang, who did Master of None, and he's like, yeah, I'm working on the show. I have no idea like who's gonna see it, but they gave money to create it. So I think that there's, we have to sort of think about strategically being able to like sort of influence. I think that's really important. But then also I think we need to sort of really support our and I think Pillars is a unique situation because we're not really funding films or things like that too seriously. I think, while, what we're really trying to do is think about creating online spaces. I think Issa Rae has done a really phenomenal job of sort of leveraging sort of what was, an online webisodes to, becoming just sort of an incredible cultural force. And I think that we need to be sort of thinking about ways to get stories. One thing that Jen has always said is, right now, anyone with a cell phone can sort of have influence and sort of tell their stories. And we need to think about, Pillars is really focused on building an online home or an online hub for people to be able to sort of share, what they're doing and what that leads to is it's hard to say, but I think sort of empowering young people to be able to sort of share their stories, I think will ultimately always lead to good things.
Well, if we all can thank our panelists, we're going to wrap up right now. Thank you so much for all your insights. We appreciate you being here. And we're going to turn it over to Katie.